I'm going to start you off with a little quote. And I'm going to set up that quote by saying this. There's few things in this world that freak me out. Most of my listeners already know what that is or what they are. The first one is doppelgangers. The idea that I could one day meet a version of myself. I don't know, like that's just like face to face with like an evil version of me. That will always freak me out if I see it in media. Like Us, in the movie Us, by Jordan Peele. The preview to that was just eerie. I mean, the movie itself, man, and he could have done a lot with that. But even, there were some scenes that I was just like, oh, this shit is unsettling. So just the idea of meeting your own self and battling your own self, unsettling. 2, the Borg, the collective, loss of individuality and becoming part of this hive mentality or a hive period, terrifying. Like, of all the characters that they've met on, all the Star Trek episodes, that I've watched, every time the Borg, I see those freaking cubes, my skin crawls. I don't know why. Even before, I knew who they were, I just remember seeing them and going, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. So those are the 2 things that terrify me. And somehow, this author, Larry Naveen, managed to take those 2 concepts and merge them together to something that could actually be realistic and just terrify me even more. Now, before I say the quote, I came across this author. It's a short story by reading the works of Michio Kaku, and I strongly recommend his works. If you have any interest in quantum physics, parallel worlds, any of that nature, he does a really great job of taking potentially difficult concepts and bringing them down to a way that regular, normal people would understand. And a couple of books that I have read this week so far, Parallel Worlds, Physics of the Future, and I'm presently reading, I just started it, The Future of Humanity. Now, in Parallel Worlds, he cites this book, this short story, and I remember as I read it, I was like, okay, well, let me go check out the story. It's an excerpt from this the short story collection of short stories called Madness from the Inconstant Moon. And here's the quote. The universe split every time someone made a decision. Split so that every decision ever made could go both ways. Every choice made by every man, woman, and child on earth was reversed in the universe next door. Every choice made by every man, woman, and child on earth was reversed in the universe next door. Okay, so for those of you who have heard of entanglement or haven't, I guess, what entanglement is like essentially it's this is defined as you can take any 2 molecules or whatever, and once they are, I'm trying to simplify this because I don't want it to get too technical, but across time and space, once they're entangled, they essentially reflect on each other. Einstein called it, quote, spooky action at a distance. There was a physicist, I don't remember his name, but the way he would demonstrate this is he would always wear mismatched socks, okay? And so if you saw him walking and you happened to glance at his right foot and saw that he had a red sock on, you automatically knew information was conveyed to you in an instant at light speed or faster than light speed even, I don't know, that his other sock was not going to be red. And he did it as a joke, but also as an exercise to show you essentially what entanglement was or is. Now, what this author, Larry Naveen, has done with that concept is to take it and using the multiverse hypothesis, basically say that you are more or less entangled. Like all of us are entangled, but you are entangled with yourselves and other realities, so that every action that you do, in order for there to be balance in this universe, right? Every action that you do, there is another version of yourself that does the opposite. And I knew that on paper, you know what I mean? Like, I knew that, every time you make a decision, reality or the universe splits in a way, and then another universe is like actualized. Like, I knew this. I know this. I've talked about this, right? Like, some multiverse hypothesis, or different universes are just constantly branching out, and they exist as probabilities, to be actualized by your consciousness. I've talked about this. But when he said that, I've talked about this on this podcast and my other podcast, The Dark Oracle's Guide to the Multiverse. Like, I've talked about all that. I know this in theory, in logic, in my brain. But when he said, every choice you make was reflected in the universe next door, my skin crawled. And then my mind started to go apeshit. Like, I was like, oh shit. Yo. Okay, so entanglement. Every decision, you are entangled. Imagine being entangled with this alternate self. Like when you look in the mirror, okay, and you see that version of yourself in the mirror, like the reverse of you, right? And it walks away. Like, imagine if every choice you make, okay, it is forced. It is enslaved to your will. It is forced to do the opposite. Okay, if your mind isn't like, if you're not like, okay, whoa, right now I'm going to continue because I want you to get to the point where you're like, oh shit. Like, these are based on facts, okay? So what he says is, every decision you make, your entangled self is forced to do the opposite. Every decision was made both ways. The universe needs balance so that all your actions are canceled out. The universe needs balance. So it's one thing to sit and think, like I used to think, like, oh, imagine like, oh, well, there's a version of myself out there that, let's say, like, I got divorced in my 20s. There's a version of myself out there that didn't get divorced. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But then what this says is there's a version of myself that did not get divorced because I got divorced. So my action forced this other me to live that life. Every decision you make is reversed in another entangled world. So, like, like, think about all of the stupid things that you have, like, stopped yourself from doing. Right? And then you found out later on that if you had done that thing, like, you would have suffered. Right? Like, imagine, like, you met this guy, okay? This is just a story that popped into my head, okay? You meet this guy, and he's, like, awesome, but for some reason, you just decide, I don't want to date this person, right? And then one of your friends ends up dating this guy, and then this guy turns out to be, like, the biggest piece of shit, and he's, like, abusive and just the worst. Like, he was a sociopath and all of this stuff, and you realize, like, oh my God, like, that could have been me. Now imagine there's a version of yourself that, because you didn't make that decision, they were forced by you not making the decision to make that decision. Because it's a reflection, right? All your actions are canceled out. The universe forces balance. When you look in the mirror, right? The mirror reflects you. So everything you do in the mirror is like essentially enslaved to you. So everything you do in the mirror, your reflection has to do the opposite, right? We wear our wedding rings on our left hand, but when you look in the mirror, it's on its right hand. Right? So it's forced, because of the actions you take in this reality, it's forced to do the opposite. Now imagine that, take it out of the mirror and put it into multiverse, into reality, where every action causes another version of yourself to experience the opposite reaction. Ooh, every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. That bugs me. Like, oh my God. And then I thought, because why not, right? My mind, I was like, well, what if What if we are the mirror? What if we're the reflections? And what if we are enslaved by our parallel selves? Like, what if, like, the reason why, like, you know, there's things that you want to do, but you, for some reason or another, you can't seem to get yourself going, right? So oh man, I got to get up and work out today. I don't want to work out, right? But what if the reason why you don't want to work out is because your parallel self is like a more conscious version of you, right? Because you're unconscious. In order for you to be unconscious, it has to be conscious. They are conscious. So their consciousness makes you unconscious. Balance, right? Equal and opposite reaction. And so the reason why you can't get up to work out is because there's an alternate version of you that is working out. And in order for that version of you to continue to work out, it needs to keep you suppressed. Right? Now imagine if in this imagine in this alternate world, they are actually aware on the grand level. They are aware of our existence, right? Remember, opposites. So we aren't, for the most part, if you ask most people, like average people, are there parallel worlds and do they exist? People are going to be like, no, it's just us. Most people think that way, right? So it's not common knowledge, which means somewhere out there, there's an opposite reality where it is common knowledge that there is an alternate time, there is an alternate reality that essentially is controlled by their actions, right? I'll say that again. By and large, in our universe, most people aren't even aware of an alternate reality, an alternate universe, which means as a reflection of that, there has to be a universe where where humanity is aware of us. Now, if that's the case, and we're dealing with the multiverse hypothesis, and we're dealing with entanglement being a thing, then that means that universe has to be comprised of people who are aware on some level that their actions will be reflected back on us. If we are living in a world where people are largely unconscious, then that means that people on the mirror universe are largely conscious. And if they are largely conscious, we are unconscious. The majority of us are unconscious as a result of them being conscious. And in order for them to stay conscious, we have to stay unconscious. And so more or less, we are essentially enslaved in a way by our parallel selves. Like that would be a science fiction story that I would watch that. This is my idea, but I'm patenting it right now. Today is February 26th. I will not publish this on February 26th, but I recorded it on February 26th, 2021. If you're hearing this, I know that you're listening to me. But hit me up, like email me. I want to write this script with you because like there's some truth to this. Like, I mean, there's clearly a scientific basis behind it. But if this is true, you know, so all of it, I've said this on this podcast too, we don't have free will. The free will is an illusion. Now, the next step with this as the foundation is, with this idea as a foundation is, that is free will an illusion because of the fact that in a mirror universe to ours, it's not. Like they have free will there, and in order for them to have free will, we can't or we don't. Like in this world, being a conscious person is anomalous. Like if you are conscious and awake and aware, you're the anomaly. Which must mean that in that world, being unconscious, being an NPC or whatever, or just, a drone controlled by society and all that, that is uncommon. Like you have to literally take what's happening in our world and flip it. The reason why maybe we have so much wars is so that they can have peace. So then if we become and we start living lives with that knowledge, then that means that could their awareness could said, mirror universe be harnessing this fact, right? Or this idea, I guess. I'm not going to say it's fact because I can't prove it, but following the train of thought, could they be harnessing that aware and living intently, thus essentially enslaving us, right? They are manipulating the laws of the universe in order for them to continue to prosper as a society. It reminds me of the TV show with that dude from Dawson's Creek, Fringe. And Fringe deals with, they're basically twin worlds or parallel worlds. And there was a scientist in both worlds. One of them was working, they were both working on the same equation. They were both trying to save their son. And one of their sons died and the other son survived, right? Mirror universe, right? And then one of them solved this equation that was, to be used to save their son. And then the other one could not figure out how to solve it. Okay. And vice versa, but opposites were occurring, right? And essentially the doctor on the opposite universe was just an asshole. He was like straight up evil. And he was willing to like destroy our universe if it meant that his universe would be okay. I mean, if you knew on some level, especially as a physicist, that essentially for every action there's equal and opposite reaction, you knew this. And you knew that in order for you to succeed, the other universe had to fail. Your other self, your doppelganger, becomes your adversary in a way. Now, I said in the previous episode that the battle is against yourself, and I'm taking this step even further and saying, like, what if the battle literally is versus yourself in an alternate world, in a twin reality? Like, think about it. Like, let's think about who's the most successful. Somewhere out there in a parallel world, Jeff Bezos did not start Amazon. Somewhere out there in a parallel world, Jeff Bezos, like, fell prey to the voice in his head. His own self was conquered by self-doubt, and now he's just some dude that worked, in Wall Street or whatever he did before Amazon. And then in that world, Amazon doesn't exist. In order for our Bezos in this reality to succeed, that Bezos had to fail. Right? So in order for you to succeed in this world, your alternate self in a parallel universe has to fail, and vice versa. Now, if we're operating under the premise that this other universe, right, because we are unaware of their existence, more or less, they know about our existence, then they must also know that their successes are predicated on our failures. And then that starts to open up the whole, like, wormhole, the whole rabbit hole thing, wormhole, down the rabbit hole, nerd, I'm a nerd, I'm like down the wormhole, but it does. Well, I say wormhole accidentally, but only because wormholes take you to alternate realities, to parallel worlds, to twin realities. But, like, think about it. Like, look at everything in your life. Like, every decision that you made or have made, and then ask yourself, like, if you are really, what's going on here? And then just play with this idea for me. Like, just with me. It's just an idea. It's just a thought. It's just something in your head to think about. I'm sitting here right now and I'm thinking about myself. The simple fact that I'm now aware of this makes me wonder if then my alternate self is unaware of this as a result of my awareness. So then that makes me go, okay, if I'm one of the lucky ones in our reality to be conscious of this, what am I going to do with this information? Am I going to continue to allow myself to essentially self-sabotage? Or am I going to recognize that and go, okay, I'm lucky here, right? I'm conscious, I'm awake, I'm aware, right? And ultimately too, like my thing lately has been, dude, like get up and go. You know what I mean? Like it takes me a while to get going in the day. Like every day I get up at like 7 a.m, but I don't get to my studio to do anything productive until like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you ask me, what did I do with my time? Why is this happening? I don't have a reason. I don't. Although now I'm left wondering if the reason why I don't seem to be able to get things going until 3 o'clock in the afternoon is because my alternate self is working and doing stuff from 7 to 3 in the afternoon. And then once it gets off, then I'm able to, work. Like this theory is definitely something interesting to think about at the very least. But I wanted to share that with you. And I want you to think about the next time you want to accomplish something and you decide against it. Are you deciding against it because that's an act of free will? Is that even a decision? Or is it something that there's an alternate version of yourself that in order for them to succeed, you have to fail? And are you okay with that? Like this takes the whole your biggest adversary is yourself argument to like a metaphysical quantum level. Like there's literally a version of you out there that needs you to fail in order for them to succeed. Now the key here is, can you maintain a level of balance? Because if you can maintain a level of balance, and that ensures that your alternate self will also be balanced, and then you can both succeed. Can you work in tandem with your alternate self? Can you work with your alternate self, whether or not you're aware of their existence or not? If you are unaware of their existence, according to this theory, they have to be aware of you. So if there's a way to communicate information across space-time, across realities, without verbally talking to them by your action and your choices, right? The way that the physicist I mentioned earlier, he was able to communicate information. It said, listen, I put on my left sock, it's red today, or my right sock is red today. Me as an observer seeing his red sock, I know that, okay, his left sock is, or his other sock, I don't even know what I said, but his other sock is not going to be red, right? That was his way of communicating information about entanglement. Now, how would you communicate with an alternate version of yourself, right? Communicating with a parallel version of yourself. Drastic changes in behavior. If you're operating under this premise, and a lot of times I say stuff and then I read about it in a book on physics like months later. So take me at my word here, because I'm probably right, and I just haven't read a book about it to basically back it up. But I'm sure now that I've said it, in a couple of months, I'll run across a book that says exactly what I said. So just take me at my word. I've said enough things on this podcast that have come, to pass, or that I found like physicists, scientists saying the exact same thing, which now makes me wonder if there is something being communicated across universes, because I'm an artist, even though I'm very logical, right? And Einstein was an artist, but his art was science. His art was physics, right? So you almost need a mind of an artist in order to be scientific, because you have to think outside the box to come up with these theoretical physics, right? With these theories in quantum physics. And so that was what, he was not good at math. He was an artist, case in point. And now I think of my life and think of, an alternate version of myself. And I've joked, especially on my TikTok, about like meeting my alternate self and finding out that she was like a physicist, right? But now I'm like, well, what if that's not a joke? Like, what if there's something happened? I mean, I have an interest in physics. What kind of artist just reads books on physics? Like, who does that? You know what I mean? And like I said, a lot of stuff that I think about and talk about, I'll pick up a book on physics, and the physicists are saying the same thing. So that tells me that there's information being communicated here, that there's got to be a version of myself in this mirror reality, right? My twin, in a way, that is in physics, right? And she's using my artistic mind to create theories. And on the flip side, I'm using their scientific mind to, I'm not sure I guess to do my podcast. You know what I mean? But like I said, just bear that with me rather. So if what I'm saying is correct, then there should be a way for anyone to communicate through actions that you are aware, and maybe take it a next step further and say, okay, well, I don't want this to be a competition. Why do I have to fail, for you to succeed? Can we work in tandem? See, communication doesn't have to be verbal. I have a lot of dreams where when I wake up to write them out, I realize that the characters that I'm interacting with in my dreams are actually are not even moving their mouth. They're just communicating information with me, to me rather, in a way that that is nonverbal. I've noticed that, and to me, nonverbal communication is inefficient. I mean, I'll paint a painting. I'm sorry, no, verbal communication is inefficient. I'll paint a painting, and then somebody will ask me, well, what were you thinking behind the painting? And my response is always agitation, because it's like they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's why I'm painting. If I wanted to give you 1,000 words, I wouldn't be a painter, right? The image is there to convey the message. If you cannot get the message, then you're missing it. I am not going to then try to articulate it to you with words, something that I've tried to do and I've done with an image, right? And I'm taking that the next step is, could you communicate information? Could we communicate information on some level of awareness? Can that awareness, like, why do I have to be unconscious in order to make in order for my alternate self to be conscious? Why can't we both be conscious, but just in a way that it's balanced, right? And I am a balanced individual, and I've become more balanced as I've lived longer, and it kind of makes me wonder now if my alternate self has reached this conclusion that I'm now extrapolating on this podcast. I wonder if my alternate self reached this conclusion earlier in life and realized, like, okay, let's say, like, I've had moments in my life that have just been down and depressive, right? And as I've lived longer, I've become more balanced, less emotional, and more neutral. But if I were depressed, right, and chronically down, it kind of makes me wonder if my alternate self has been up this whole time, and then realize what I just said throughout this podcast, that, okay, her behavior, right, reflects on my feeling. And maybe she took compassion, realized that if she's up all the time, then someone's got to be down, and that someone is her alternate self in this mirror universe. And so by balancing herself from, peaks, right, from avoiding highs, it kept me from dropping too low. And so maybe that's how we now communicate. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're like, what is she? I don't care. Like, 5 people in this world are going to listen to this, and it's going to fucking click. Okay. And so that's who I'm talking to. If this episode doesn't bode with you, or you're not, it's not clicking, you're not understanding what I'm saying, it's okay. But for you who are listening to this right now and you're like, okay, I'm feeling this and I'm hearing what you're saying, you're the one who, I'm communicating with you. So fuck the noise. But she must have recognized that, oh, okay, something's happening. Because like I said, right, and if we are unaware of the existence of a parallel universe, even though parallel universes do exist, I mean, quantum computers are a thing. Google D-Wave, their actual company that works with quantum computers, then clearly parallel universes are real. Like, they're just take that at face value, okay? Then if what I'm saying is about entanglement is true, right? And also for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We take that statement and we extrapolate it across the multiverse. Then for us being in a world where we're largely ignorant of, there being a multiverse, and even unable to communicate with a parallel world, there is our twin world to ours where they are aware of our existence and are able to communicate with us, just because that's how it works. Like I said, use the mirror analogy. Every time you wave in the mirror, your reflection waves with the opposite hand. You're wearing a ring in your left hand, your reflection is wearing its ring on its right hand. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So clearly, at some level, one, I started off sort of in a depressive state, right? And my opposite self was higher, like probably a very happy-go-lucky person. So while I'm over here fucking suffering, like this bitch is like getting everything, she wants in life. And then I slowly started to come out of that suffering, but I didn't peak. I didn't allow myself to peak, in the sense like I was very controlled, trying to stay balanced. Now, on some level, she became aware of me and realized that in order for me to continue to stay balanced, right, she had to kind of balance herself out. So now we're able to share energy across the universe, communicate across the universe. Like, how do I know what I'm saying to you right now isn't her talking through me? I've said through this podcast, go back a year to this date and listen. This is dawning on me, but go back to last year, February 2020, and listen to, I think the 13th episode on the 13th, where I talk about alternate selves and communicating with your future self. But I've been saying that there is an aspect of myself that has been trying to communicate with me. I just assumed, because I was operating on, one level, I just assumed that self was maybe an older version of myself, an actualized version of myself, and it still very well could be. But what makes me think that it's just one self? It could very well be. It could have very well been. Oh, shit. So a year ago, I had an episode. It was called Your Death Date, and I was concerned. It was like I had a walking premonition. I explained it all in that episode. The episode's actually called Your Death Date. You can listen to the one previously, and you see what led up to that, and then you listen to that the episode called Your Death Date, and then I think it was like March something that I thought I was gonna die. Like I legit thought I was getting a message saying I was gonna die. It just dawned on me that if I were supposed to die on that date, I didn't, clearly, because I'm talking to you. There was a version of myself that did die on that day. So that just dawned on me. Now, do I think that that version of myself that died on that day is the same person that I've been referring to in this alternate reality as like a physicist and all of that? No, I don't think so. Although I do think that on some level, like I said, there could be more than one of yourself communicating with you at any given time. In the previous episode, I talked about man's many eyes. So not only do we have to deal with our own bodies and our, your consciousness versus your body and yourselves, you could also be communicating with literally alternate versions of yourself across the multiverse. That's a whole other thing. This world is crazy. I think one of the reason why I love physics so much, and I read as much on it as I possibly can, because it's like, it's like fiction, but it's real. It's like science fiction, but it's real. I actually had a quote revelation yesterday. You could say it's a communication from an alternate self. That could be a thing too. But I actually had a revelation yesterday that I need to start, once I'm done with, there's a couple of books that I've downloaded that I want to get through. I'm going to start incorporating more science fiction, because it's one thing, a lot of the books that I read, especially like books on science and spiritualism, metaphysics, all of that. As I'm reading, it's almost like I feel like I already knew the information, and then all of these writers are just basically confirming stuff that I already knew before I read it. And that's just been my life. But to have the revelation of maybe you should start reading more science fiction, because science fiction is different. What science fiction does is it blends science with art. Okay, so now it's balanced, right? So science is left-brained, and that's what I've been reading. It's a lot of nonfiction, left-brain stuff, right? And then fiction is right-brain, very creative, right? Stories, and you're imagining worlds and possibilities and all of that. But science fiction is a marriage of the left brain and the right brain together. And when you take those two and you balance them, it expands the mind in a way that you cannot get just with fiction and just with science. And a lot of science fiction writers, Asimov, Niven, and in order for them to write a, quote, believable story, or at least believable up to a certain point, they make sure they go out of their way to do the research to find out what is possible and impossible in physics, and then they create and construct a story out of that. And that, to me, is valuable, right? One of my favorite science fiction books that I've read, and I rarely read fiction, that's the thing. So a lot of the stuff that I come up with and I think of is just me in my brain after I've read something, scientific. My brain goes, oh my God, well, what if, like I did earlier in this episode, I'm like, oh God, what if we're enslaved to these people in this other world? And then of course my brain took it in, not to a not so dark place, which is good. But the Blake Crouch, I believe, is the author's name, and it was called Resurgence. I'm probably wrong. Dang it. I'll write it in the description. I just lost it. It popped in my head and I lost it. And I don't want to go look for it, because as soon as I type it into Audible, the moment I search for it, I'm going to accidentally hit play, and then it will... Okay, it's called Recursion. Good. Recursion. By Blake Crouch. What he did with that book is take everything that I've read about consciousness transfer and time travel and alternate realities, but he put it in a story about essentially your consciousness traveling and inhabiting various bodies through time over and over and over and over again. And that, to me, is beautiful. That's like the best kind of art, because it blends, it's balance. It's like left brain, right brain together, right? It takes something that, a scientist, a physicist can say, okay, this is what is possible, right? A neurologist can say, okay, this is what is possible. Okay, that's art, all right? What I'm about to explain is art, sorry. But a physicist can say, this is what is possible. A biologist can say, this is what is possible. A neurologist can say, this is what is possible. A doctor can say, this is what is possible, right? And then what a science fiction writer does is takes all of those things and mixes it together to create a story and show you, okay, with all of these things that are possible, boom, here's a possible world. If all of these things are possible, then this world exists. And then they tell you a story from that world, because once again, the multiverse hypothesis is real. It's tested in math. It is what it is, okay? Then that means that anything that you can imagine, anything that is possible in our reality exists as a probability out there and is being experienced by some version of yourself. So then what science fiction becomes is, in a way, a gateway to other worlds. Now, I've talked about the Akashic records on this podcast. I've talked about how, there's predictive programming. So people think that, these TV shows, quote, predict the future. And my response is that they're not predicting the future. What they're doing is there are certain instances that get kind of burned into our collective psyche that permeate through time. Things like 9/11, like that was a very important moment through history, and it almost burns a hole. It's like a location in space-time, right? So it burns a hole in a way in our collective consciousness, so that it then comes out through fiction. It comes out through music. You have artists painting about 9/11 before it happened. You had artists writing stories about similar situations about what happened on 9/11 before it happened, because on some level it was something that happened. It's like a location, it's like a destination in space-time, right? Like California is a destination, right? 9/11 is a destination in space-time, and we collectively know that something happened on that date, and we collectively know whether or not a lot of us, majority of us, are not conscious of it, but on some level, because it's a location. Like, I have never been to Australia, but I know it exists as a location because I've seen other people, experience that, and I've talked to other people, right? So I don't have to make it up. I know it exists, right? So when creatives talk about things, or they depict things, like the Simpsons is a big one. They're like, they're predicting the future. Well, no, they're on some level, you get a collective of artists who their job is to take things, right? Their minds are expanded in a way that the rest of us aren't really, right? And they take things, and they're just supposed to construct narratives. Well, eventually, when you're constructing a narrative, you eventually will end up constructing a probable reality by accident. And then, of course, it's kind of disseminated it's disseminated on television to all of these minds, and then either we make it happen or we experience it, or both. I don't know which. But they're tapping into the Akashic records in a way. And what the Akashic record is, think of it as a Google in a way, but it's a Google of past, present, future, and probable realities, right? And so take that mindset and apply it to science fiction, right? If you want a peek into what is capable, what the future of humanity is capable of, you can read physics, you can read books on science, but they can only show you what we're capable of right now. That's what science is. And they can say, okay, this is a theory, but even theories are fictions in a way until another theory comes along. That's why it's called a theory. And we as a society don't respect fiction, myself included, or up until recently, as much as we do science. And what I love about science, it's the blending of the two. If you watch Star Trek, they predicted things that, like, I'm talking about like the original Star Trek, like they had things that look like cell phones. You know what I mean? They had, like, they would push the button and talk to the computer. Well, you can push a button and talk to your cell phone now, or talk to Siri or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, in a way, Gene Roddenberry and his writers were able to foresee certain aspects of our reality now before science could, right? So a science fiction writer was able to take what science had given them, right? And think of what science gives you as like paint and a brush, right? And then you are the artist as a science fiction writer, and you construct this reality. So they were able to take what they knew of and kind of project themselves into a future where, okay, this could possibly happen. Could there be a society of individuals who decide that they would rather, blend in with the machine, right? Because it makes them more logical and less less worrying, less emotional, because they decided that emotion is a bad thing, and having a hive and collective and everybody behaving the same way is more important, right? Yes. I mean, you have people who are futurists right now that are excited at the chance to Elon Musk to merge with computers. Elon Musk is saying stuff like that's how humanity is going to, quote, survive or whatever. Is it that's our next phase of evolution, is that we have to merge with computers. Well, that was the Borg, as imagined by Gene Roddenberry like decades ago. What does that look like in the future? I don't know. So when I talk about these things, I do it with a sense of abandon. There a part of me that, as I talk about these things, kind of worries, like, oh no, this sounds crazy, or are people gonna? Yes. And then there's another part of me that doesn't give a fuck. Like, and honestly, to be perfectly frank, I want that I don't give a fuck aspect of myself to be much more prevalent and stronger than the part of me that doubts and worries about, well, this might come off as whatever. Because at the end of the day, these are the thoughts that I have. And I'm not pulling them out of my butt, right? Like, I'm reading about it and it's coming to me and I'm wondering out loud. And there are people out there, every time I talk to people, they go like, normal people don't talk about this. And I'm like, well, normal people don't talk about this because they're worried about not being normal. Normal people don't talk about this stuff because they're worried about not being seen as normal. Like, normal was some sort of thing that you should want to aspire for. That's fucking basic, right? So now you're left with having stupid conversations about the weather when you should really be talking about the nature of reality. Like, we really should be talking about what the fuck are we doing here? Like, we really should be talking about, are you enslaved by your alternate self? Like, even if it's wrong, or even if it's not right, what if it is? What if it is? These are the sort of questions that scientists ask themselves that sort of guide them towards discoveries that benefit mankind. We are doing ourselves as a disservice as a race, as a human race, by continuously forcing ourselves to behave in a certain way, think in a certain way, be a part of this collective that all thinks the same thing, talks about the same thing, right? How does that help? Who does that help? So I'm going to keep talking about these kind of things, and I want you to keep thinking about alternate universes and parallel worlds and reality shifts, and what does the future look like? Why not? Every decision you make is reversed in an entangled world. If you don't do things, if you don't exercise your mind, there's a version of you out there that will. Right? That's reaping the benefits of a certain particular probability, a probability of success, a probability of free will, right? If you allow fear to stop you from allowing your mind to wander because, I don't like how I feel when I think about these things. Okay. You stay normal, you stay average, you stay neutral, you stay subjugated, you stay a part of the collective, you stay a drone. The very fact that few people talk about this stuff is the very reason why you should be talking about this stuff, because that's what elevates your mind above average, above the drone, above the fray. Why be average? Read some science fiction. Play with these thoughts in your head. Read some fiction. Read some nonfiction. Balance them all out. Ask yourself, what if? All of these are exercises in which we start to, chip away at the chains that bind our minds and restrict our individuality. And this is how we help humanity as a whole. See, the very definition of evolution is you have an entity, you have a being that looks around and goes, okay, everybody is living in the muck, right? In the pond and in the scum of it. And then one individual looks around and sees everybody in the muck and goes, fuck this. I'm going to see what's outside of this. And it gets up and it walks out. They get rewarded. That is an evolved being. An evolved being isn't an entity that looks around and goes, I'm comfortable in normative. Normative would have been for that, that first prehistoric, whatever, I forget what the actual terminology is, but that entity that lived in the scum to turn and look and say, okay, well, there's other amoebas here, so we'll just stay here and just do what everybody's done. That's not an evolved entity. The evolved entity is the one who walks up and goes, you know what, I'm going to get out of here and see what happens. Right? It doesn't look around and see, oh, what else is everybody else talking about? Oh, okay, that's what I'm going to do. You need to do that in order for humanity to evolve. So if you have listened to this point, to this part, that tells you that you are the next step in human evolution. If you're looking around and you don't like things the way they are, if you're looking around and you say, I don't feel like I'm supposed to be a part of this world, it's the same way as that prehistoric amoeba that was in the pond scum. There's a terminology, it's not coming to me right now. As soon as I stop recording, it's going to pop into my head. But you know what I mean. Like, when they show you the story of evolution or whatever, it all starts in the muck, right? And there was something that had always existed in the muck, and then it goes like this, and it walked out. And then that changed into something else, and then that changed into something else, and then blah, 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 whatever. If you don't believe in that, I personally am like, meh. But you can even look at it as like society. An evolved individual is a person who looked around and said, okay, we're eating raw meat. I don't want to eat raw meat anymore. What is fire? Okay, boom, let me rock these things together. I could put the meat over it. Okay, now all of a sudden everybody's cooking. But that wasn't something collectively. That was one individual that helped evolve the rest of society. If your neck is above the fray and you're looking around, it's because you are the one who is meant to bring the rest of us of humanity up to the next level. A lot of my friends I talk to about this, and they're like, I just feel like I don't belong. I feel like you're not supposed to. I'm talking to myself, dude. You're not supposed to belong. Right? If you feel like you don't belong, fine, walk out of the pond. Primordial soup. That's the word, primordial soup. Right? The first entity, the first being to walk out of the primordial soup looked around and said, I don't belong here. And he walked out, and that was evolution. If everybody's thinking the same thing and you go, I don't want to think this, I'm going to think something else, boom, that's evolution. If everybody's doing one thing and you go, I want to do something different, boom, that's evolution. So long as it benefits humanity and it works towards a greater good, right? This is how humanity evolves. And your job, if you're hearing this and this resonates with you, your job isn't to be like everybody else. Your job isn't to think like everybody else. You are that creature. This happens all the time, right? You have animals that evolve to adapt to their environment, right? So let's say you got a bunch of red birds and they're constantly getting eaten, right? And then all of a sudden there's one bird that is born, brown. And it's like, I'm still alive. Cool. Okay. So then it mates with a red bird, and then their offspring are born like brown. Well, the ones that are red are going to get eaten, but the ones that are brown keep going on, right? And the next thing you know, nature has produced a bunch of brown birds that are better suited for the environment. Okay, so we're living in a society right now where everybody wants to be, everybody's programmed to be average. Okay, that's fine. Nothing, it is what it is. But we're watching what average looks like, and it's not good. We have the society that we have right now. People are starving for no reason, living on the streets. That's normative. And you're looking up and you're going, this isn't right. Well, if you feel like this isn't right, it's because you're the one who's supposed to change the environment. That's the difference between an animal and a human being. See, an animal adapts to the environment. A human being masters the environment, changes its environment. That's how we get to where we got to where we are now, right? We were born into an environment. We didn't grow claws and fur, right? So we had to adapt. We wore fur, and then we decided, okay, that's a bit cruel. And then we manufactured, fabric and things like that. We take the environment and adapt it to our will. If you don't like the way things are, and you're capable of looking around and going, okay, this isn't it, leave the environment and bring others with you. Show them something different. I don't like the environment that we're in right now, where people are okay with being mediocre and nobody talks about anything that matters. But the solution to that isn't to be quiet about it because I'm afraid of people who are still in the primordial soup. How does that help? If I just say nothing, if I don't talk about these things. Instead, I talk about it because I'm capable of talking about it. And by talking about this is how ideas spread. You start opening things up in other people's minds. You start waking them up. And then they come with you. That's evolution. Let's all evolve.